I'm willing to try. I'm really rather ill-prepared, but I enjoy just,
2008, Malibu, California. Pernell Roberts sat in a dimly lit room with the curtains drawn, 80 years old and dying of pancreatic cancer, when he made a strange proposal to documentary filmmaker Marcus Webb. He wanted to record his final confession. 6 hours of brutal honesty about everything he had never told anyone, and Webb would receive $50,000 for his time.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players.
One condition made Webb pause before accepting. After the recording ended, every single file had to be destroyed. Webb took the offer because $50,000 changes a broke filmmaker's life, and over the following weeks, he captured 60 hours of raw confession from a man who understood death would arrive soon. When the final session ended, Roberts sat motionless and watched Webb delete every file, empty the trash folder, and format every drive. The old man nodded once, whispered, "Thank you," and Marcus Webb walked out believing the secret had died. Pernell Roberts passed away in January 2010, certain nobody would ever hear what he confessed. But here's what Roberts never discovered. Webb kept a backup hidden for 14 years, and in 2024, those tapes finally surfaced. What they revealed shocked everyone who listened, because Pernell Roberts turned out to be something other than the hero of principles America remembered.
Full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honor, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation.
He spent 45 years defending a decision that destroyed everything he loved, including the chance to be a real father before his only son died. Understanding what Roberts confessed requires going back to 1959, the year Bonanza premiered on NBC. By 1964, 60 million Americans tuned in every week, making it the #1 show on the planet. Roberts played Adam Cartwright, the intellectual eldest son, and by 1965, he earned $100,000 per episode, roughly $900,000 in today's money. At 37 years old, Pernell Roberts possessed everything an actor could want. Then, he simply walked away from all of it. The decision baffled Hollywood, but the roots stretched back to his childhood in Waycross, Georgia. When Roberts turned 11, he taught Sunday school, standing in front of children and telling them everyone existed as equals in God's eyes. One morning, something clicked that changed him forever. He looked around and realized the church remained completely segregated, that black families worshipped in a different building, that the message of equality amounted to a lie. That realization broke something inside him that never healed. 2 decades later on the Bonanza set, he watched the same lie play out on a massive scale. Native Americans portrayed as bloodthirsty savages, Mexican characters written as cowards, Chinese roles reduced to cheap jokes, black actors cast almost exclusively as criminals. 60 million people absorbed these stereotypes as entertainment, and Roberts understood they actually learned them as truth. He fought the writers for 6 years and lost every single battle, which left him with an impossible choice. Stay rich and remain complicit, or leave poor and keep his integrity. Roberts chose to leave. He paid for that decision for the next 45 years. In the confession tapes, Roberts named 5 specific people who he claimed destroyed his life. The first name belonged to Lorne Green, the actor who played patriarch Ben Cartwright and who America adored as the perfect television father. But Roberts remembered a very different man behind that warm public image. According to Roberts, Lorne Green never qualified as genuinely good. He qualified as comfortable, and an enormous difference separates those two things. The confrontation that defined their relationship happened in 1961 during production of an episode about the Paiute tribe. Roberts read the script and found Native Americans attacking settlers out of pure bloodlust, with no context and no humanity. He marched to Lorne's trailer and laid out his concerns directly, calling the script racist propaganda. Lorne listened politely and responded with 5 words. Roberts carried for the rest of his life. He called it just a story. Roberts pushed harder and reminded him 60 million people watched this show every week, that this qualified as education, not entertainment. Lorne paused for a long moment, then shook his head and admitted he didn't want to make waves. That conversation repeated itself dozens of times over 4 years. The final confrontation arrived in 1964, when Roberts made one last desperate appeal. He asked Lorne to stand on the right side just once, to use his influence as the show's biggest star to demand better scripts. What nobody expected came next. Lorne turned red with genuine anger for the first and only time in their 6 years together. He declared he fought by not fighting, that his job involved keeping everyone comfortable. Roberts fired back that Lorne didn't keep peace, he enabled evil, and a crucial difference separated those two things. Lorne exploded and shouted he wasn't evil, just practical. And if Roberts wanted to play hero, he should go ahead, but shouldn't expect anyone to throw away their career for someone else's crusade. That exchange ended their friendship permanently. Lorne Green died in 1987, and Roberts did not attend the funeral. In the tapes, he explained his reasoning. Lorne never qualified as a villain, just a nice guy who never stood up for anything important. And nice guys who enable evil, Roberts believed, turn out worse than actual villains, because at least villains stay honest about what they are. The second name belonged to David Dortort, the man who created Bonanza and convinced Roberts to join the cast. Dortort had promised a revolutionary Western that would challenge conventions, and Roberts accepted specifically because of that vision. But here's what nobody knew at the time. The revolution never materialized. NBC executives hated anything dark or challenging, and Dortort backed down immediately whenever they complained. Roberts confronted him about the broken promise, calling the scripts garbage. Dortort's defense landed simple and infuriating. The network controlled content, and nothing could change that reality. Roberts demanded that Dortort fight back, but the creator listed all the reasons he couldn't afford that risk. Mortgage payments, monthly bills, an entire career built on staying in good graces. Roberts accused him of choosing money over integrity, and Dortort didn't attempt denial. The breaking point arrived in 1963 with an episode where Adam Cartwright falls in love with a Native American woman. Roberts read the script and realized the entire plot existed to explain why interracial love could never work. The woman had to die by the final act, turning what could have felt progressive into racist propaganda wearing a romantic mask. Roberts refused to film the episode. Dortort exploded in a way Roberts had never witnessed. He accused Roberts of destroying his show with constant complaints. Roberts shouted back that the show destroyed people, that children learned they qualified as savages and criminals because of these scripts. Dortort sat down heavily, rubbed his face, and asked if Roberts actually planned to quit the most successful show in television history over principles. Roberts said yes. Dortort laughed bitterly and called him an idiot. "Nobody cares about principles," Dortort declared. "They care about entertainment, and Bonanza entertained them." The fallout revealed something interesting years later. Dortort became wealthy and respected, exactly as he predicted, but he never watched Bonanza reruns. He couldn't stomach looking at his own creation. Roberts reflected on that detail with something approaching sympathy. Dortort proved selling your soul actually works. But Dortort also couldn't look at what he built. That counted for something. Not much, but something. The third group Roberts blamed consisted of NBC itself, specifically 3 executives who summoned him after he announced his departure. They sat across from him and explained the situation in terms that left no room for misunderstanding. Bonanza ranked as their most valuable asset, generating $200 million annually, and Roberts leaving would damage that asset. He pointed out the show featured 3 other lead actors who could carry the weight. The executives dismissed that entirely. The issue had nothing to do with replacing Adam Cartwright. The issue involved precedent. If actors could abandon shows over personal feelings, the entire system would collapse. Roberts corrected them and explained he planned to leave because the show promoted racism. The executive across from him smiled coldly and reframed the conversation. Bonanza promoted family values and generated $200 million a year, and that remained the only thing that mattered. When Roberts made clear he still intended to leave, the smiling executive leaned forward and outlined consequences. NBC maintained relationships with every studio, every production company, and every director in Hollywood. One phone call, and Roberts would never work in television again. Roberts asked if that qualified as a threat. The executive called it education. Roberts told them to make the call because he planned to leave anyway. And that's exactly what they did. For 14 years, from 1965 to 1979, Pernell Roberts could not find work in television or film. Every audition led nowhere. Every meeting got canceled. Every opportunity vanished before he could grasp it. Studios refused to hire him because hiring Roberts meant losing access to NBC, and nobody considered that trade worthwhile. Roberts survived on theater work, summer stock productions, and off-Broadway shows that paid barely enough to cover rent. He described those years with painful honesty. Friends called his decision pride. Family called it stupidity. Hollywood called it career suicide. Every time he considered going back, considered apologizing and begging for forgiveness, he remembered the scripts. He remembered 60 million people learning racism disguised as entertainment. And he stayed gone. Broke but faithful to his principles. The blacklist finally ended in 1979 when a different network cast him in Trapper John MDD. By then, Roberts had reached 50 years old, his career destroyed, his reputation ruined, and his finances devastated. He admitted in the tapes that he turned out right and they turned out wrong, and history eventually proved it. But being right didn't pay rent. Being right didn't rebuild his career. Being right didn't restore 14 stolen years of his life. The longest section of the confession dealt with Dan Blocker, and Roberts' voice broke multiple times while discussing it. Dan played Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza, and for years he ranked as Pernell Roberts' closest friend. They bonded immediately as fellow Southerners and outsiders in Hollywood, two men who felt too honest for an industry built on pretense. They ate lunch together every single day on set, discussing politics, civil rights, justice, and everything wrong with the scripts they performed. Dan agreed with every criticism Roberts raised. He called the stereotypes garbage and insisted they should fight back against the writers. But Dan Blocker never actually fought. He complained passionately, performed the racist scripts without resistance, cashed his check, and then complained again the next day. Roberts spent years believing he helped build courage in his friend, preparing Dan for the moment when he would finally take a stand. He turned out completely wrong about what those conversations meant. Dan never built courage. He vented his guilt so he could keep doing the comfortable thing with a clear conscience. The break happened in 1965, at a private lunch where Roberts told Dan he planned to leave the show. Dan stopped mid-bite and stared in disbelief. He asked Roberts to repeat himself, and when Roberts confirmed he felt done, Dan dropped his sandwich and declared Roberts couldn't leave. Roberts explained he had to go, that he couldn't take it anymore. Dan's response revealed everything about their friendship that Roberts had missed for years. Dan insisted Roberts needed to stay for the show, for the cast, for him personally. Roberts asked about the principles they discussed every day, the justice Dan claimed to believe in. Dan looked away and muttered that things felt different now. Roberts demanded to know how anything felt different, and Dan finally told him the truth. Leaving wouldn't change anything. The network would replace Roberts. The show would continue exactly the same, and he would accomplish nothing except destroying his own career. Dan accused Roberts of making this about himself, about his own conscience, rather than actually changing anything meaningful. That accusation stung, because part of Roberts wondered if it contained truth. He tried to explain he never asked Dan to leave with him, just wanted to share why he personally had to go. But Dan heard something else entirely. He accused Roberts of abandoning them, of choosing himself over his friends, of picking pride over loyalty. The silence that followed lasted long enough for their entire friendship to collapse inside it. Dan stayed on Bonanza and became even more beloved. He never spoke to Pernell Roberts again. Not a single word for 7 years, despite Roberts calling, writing letters, and trying to reach him through mutual friends. Dan Blocker died in May 1972 from a pulmonary embolism. He reached only 43 years old. Roberts went to the funeral and stood in back, hoping to pay respects to the man who had once ranked as his closest friend. Michael Landon spotted him and walked over with fury on his face. Landon told Roberts he shouldn't have come, that Dan never wanted him there, that Roberts abandoned Dan and possessed no right to mourn. Roberts walked out, climbed into his car, gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, and cried for the first time since childhood. In the tapes, his voice cracked as he described what hurt most. The pain didn't come from Dan staying on Bonanza. The pain came from Dan hating him for leaving, for doing what both of them knew qualified as right, for possessing the courage Dan couldn't find in himself. Dan died believing Roberts betrayed him. Roberts lived knowing Dan betrayed himself. That represented the real cost of principles, not just career, friendships, relationships, everything that makes life worth living. The fifth name belonged to Michael Landon, and his assessment carried surprisingly little anger. Roberts called him the smartest person on that set, because Landon understood something Roberts never grasped until far too late. Hollywood has nothing to do with being right. Hollywood concerns itself entirely with winning. Landon never ranked as Roberts' friend, just cordial and professional. What Landon possessed, relentlessly and without apology, amounted to pure ambition. He arrived in Hollywood with a single goal, becoming a star, and cared nothing about art or message. While Roberts fought with producers, Landon dined with them. While Roberts argued about scripts, Landon played golf with executives. While Roberts refused scenes, Landon negotiated more screen time and built his personal brand. In 1965, Landon visited his dressing room for the first and only time. He mentioned hearing Roberts plan to leave and asked why. Roberts explained everything about racism, stereotypes, and principles. Landon listened, nodded, and offered advice. Nobody cares about principles. Nobody remembers the principled guy. They remember the guy who stayed, who won. Landon planned to stay as long as possible, learning everything about producing and directing. When Bonanza ended, he would create his own show and make his own rules. Roberts accused him of compromising everything he believed in. Landon shrugged and admitted he didn't believe in anything at the moment. That difference separated them completely. Roberts cared about being right. Landon cared about winning. Landon proved himself right in every way. He stayed until 1973, created Little House on the Prairie for 9 seasons, followed by Highway to Heaven. He died rich, famous, and beloved in 1991 from pancreatic cancer, the same disease that would eventually claim Roberts. In the tapes, Roberts admitted he hated Landon, but not because Landon turned out wrong. He hated him because Landon turned out right. Success matters more than principle. Winning matters more than being right. Sometimes the bad guys win. Sometimes principles amount to nothing more than pride wearing a disguise. Then Roberts changed direction entirely. He asked Webb if he wanted to know who Roberts really hated, who made his life hell for 40 years, who never forgave him no matter how much time passed. The answer had nothing to do with executives or producers or former co-stars. The fans destroyed him. The ordinary people who watched Bonanza every week and felt personally betrayed when Pernell Roberts walked away. Thousands of letters flooded his home in 1965. Roberts expected at least some support for his principled stand. Instead, he found pure hatred in nearly every envelope. Fans accused him of abandoning them, destroying their show, betraying the Cartwrights as if those characters existed as real people capable of feeling hurt. The hatred escalated beyond angry letters. Roberts received death threats, actual promises of violence from people who felt entitled to his presence on their television screens. They wrote he deserved to die, hoped he would get cancer. An elderly woman once spotted Roberts in a restaurant and marched directly to his table to spit on him. When he asked why, she announced he had abandoned them, that he qualified as family, and he left. Roberts tried explaining about the racism. She cared nothing about his reasons. That hatred lasted 40 years without fading. Even after success with Trapper John M.D., critics described his career resurgence as finally recovering from his disastrous decision to leave Bonanza. They used words like disastrous and tragic mistake as if Roberts committed sin rather than took a moral stand. Roberts concluded, "Fame has nothing to do with being loved. Fame concerns being owned." Fans believed they owned him, owned Adam Cartwright, owned his loyalty. When Roberts took himself back, when he declared he owned himself, they experienced it as theft. Audiences never forgive being stolen from. Executives blackballed him for 14 years, but eventually that ended. The fans never stopped, never forgave, never released their anger. Near the end, Webb asked if Roberts regretted leaving. Roberts possessed 40 years to think about that question. 40 years of unemployment, blackballing, hatred, poverty. The answer remained no. Not because it worked, because it didn't. Not because he felt happy. He would do it again because he stood right, and sometimes being right represents the only thing you have left. But then Roberts paused, and what he said next changed everything about how his story should land. Being right doesn't matter if you end up completely alone. Being right doesn't pay rent or rebuild careers or bring friends back. Being right doesn't resurrect dead sons. Roberts began talking about his son, Jonathan Christopher Roberts, born in 1951, his only child. The marriage collapsed in 1959, and Roberts spent years distant from Jonathan, always fighting some battle that felt more important than being present. Broadway auditions, the Bonanza conflict, the blacklist years, just surviving. There always existed a reason why Roberts couldn't function as the father Jonathan needed. On April 29, 1989, Jonathan died in a motorcycle accident at 38 years old. Roberts' voice broke completely as he described receiving that news. What haunted him most involved something he never found time to do while Jonathan lived. He never proved to his son he stood right. Jonathan grew up watching his father poor and blackballed, hearing from everyone that his dad threw away a fortune for nothing. Jonathan never understood why principles mattered more than family, more than being present. Jonathan died before history validated his father. He died before the world recognized Bonanza promoted racism, that Roberts stood right all along. Roberts lived another 21 years after his son's death. 21 years carrying the weight of knowing his only child died thinking his father qualified as a fool for having principles. That represented the real cost, not career or money or fame. Never being able to prove to your own son that you weren't crazy, that you stood right about something important. When history delivered proof, Jonathan had already gone. Roberts outlived every Bonanza co-star. Dan in 1972, Lorne in 1987, Michael in 1991. He remained the last surviving Cartwright and called it a curse rather than blessing. He spent 20 years watching reruns alone, seeing old friends on screen, unable to speak to any of them. History proved him right about everything, but everyone who could acknowledge it had died. Roberts died right, alone, without closure, without validation from anyone who actually mattered. The final words have stayed with everyone who heard them. Being right doesn't matter if you end up alone. Being right doesn't pay rent. Being right doesn't bring friends back. Being right doesn't resurrect dead sons. Most of the time, being right costs everything and returns nothing. Roberts described himself as 80 years old, dying, still defending a decision made 45 years earlier, still explaining, still wondering if anyone would ever understand. Probably not, he admitted, because he spent 45 years explaining and nobody really listened. People would remember Bonanza, Lorne, Dan, Michael, the Ponderosa. They would not remember the show promoted racism. They would not remember Roberts left because his conscience demanded it. They would just remember he left. The guy who walked away from Bonanza. Not the guy with principles. Not the guy who stood right. Just the guy who left. The tape ended with a soft click. Nothing remained but silence. What would you sacrifice to stand right about something that matters? Would you give up your career, your friendships, your relationship with your only child? If you made that sacrifice, if you paid that price, would knowing you stood right feel like enough, even if nobody acknowledged it? If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. More untold stories like this one exist, and we bring them to light for anyone willing to listen. Thank you for watching.